Professor Thalak adjusted his 6 eyes, each one focusing on a different section of the Galactic Academy classroom. 23 cycles of teaching the young ones had not prepared him for this particular semester. The mixed-species classroom buzzed with nervous energy, but one corner remained suspiciously quiet. "Now then, younglings," Thalak's voice carried across the room with practiced authority. "Today we study the extinction patterns of pre-warp civilizations. Open your data tablets to section 47. A collective groan rippled through the class. The Zephyrian twins, Pip and Pop, immediately began their synchronized eye-rolling routine. The young Voltani, Skrex, made his usual clicking sounds of disapproval. But it was the small figure in the back corner that made Thalak's mandibles twitch with concern. Little Korven sat hunched over his desk, his orange fur bristling with barely contained fury. The Felinian cub had been trouble since day one, but lately his attitude had grown worse than a malfunctioning gravity generator. "Korven!" Thalak called out, his voice carrying just a hint of warning. "Please share with the class what you find so fascinating about your claws that it requires more attention than our lesson." The room fell silent. Even the normally chatty Aquarian student, Bloop, stopped making her signature bubbling sounds. Every student knew that tone. It meant Professor Thalak was reaching his limit. Korven's head snapped up, revealing bright yellow eyes that burned with defiance. "This is stupid," he growled, his young voice cracking with emotion. "Why should I care about dead civilizations when my own people are barely hanging on?" A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone knew about the Felinian refugee crisis, but bringing it up in class was considered extremely poor form. "Young one," Thalak began, his voice softening despite his annoyance. "Education helps us understand." "Understand what?" Korven interrupted, his fur now standing completely on end. "That the strong survive and the weak get forgotten. That's not education, that's just reality." The classroom door chimed softly, and in walked the new exchange instructor. Marcus Webb looked utterly ordinary by galactic standards. Medium height, brown hair, brown eyes, wearing the standard academy uniform. The only remarkable thing about humans, most aliens agreed, was how utterly unremarkable they appeared to be. "Sorry I'm late, Professor Thalak," Marcus said with an easy smile. The transport system decided to take a scenic route through 3 different sectors. Thalak's relief was palpable. "Mr. Webb, perfect timing. We were just discussing pre-warp extinction patterns." Marcus glanced around the room, immediately noticing the tension hanging in the air like stale recycled atmosphere. His eyes lingered for a moment on the bristling young Felinian. "Ah," Marcus said, nodding knowingly. "Heavy topic. Mind if I grab a chair and listen in?" Before Thalak could respond, Korven let out a particularly loud growl. "Great, another adult who thinks they know everything." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Even the most rebellious students had never been this openly disrespectful to an instructor. Pip and Pop exchanged shocked glances, their antennae quivering with second-hand embarrassment. Professor Thalak's mandibles began clicking rapidly, a sure sign of barely controlled anger. "Korven, you will show proper respect to Mr. Webb, or you will find yourself in the discipline chamber." "Respect." Korven stood up now, his small frame trembling with rage. "Why should I respect anyone? Nobody respected my family when they were dying. Nobody respected my planet when it was burning." The outburst hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several students looked genuinely frightened by the raw pain in Korven's voice. The young Felinian's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his expression remained fierce and unyielding. Marcus watched this exchange with interest, his expression thoughtful rather than shocked. He moved to lean against the wall, crossing his arms casually. "You know what, Korven?" Marcus said, his voice carrying a strange quality that made everyone in the room turn to look at him. "You're absolutely right." Professor Thalak's eyes widened so much they nearly popped out of his head. "Mr. Webb, I don't think—" "No, really," Marcus continued, his tone conversational. The kid's got a point. Respect is earned, not automatically granted because someone's older or has a fancy title. Korven's growling stopped abruptly. He stared at the human with confusion, his anger temporarily derailed by this unexpected response. However, Marcus continued, pushing himself off the wall and walking slowly toward Korven's desk. There's a difference between respect and basic courtesy. And there's an even bigger difference between being angry at the galaxy and taking it out on people who are trying to help you learn. The human stopped directly in front of Korven's desk, but he didn't loom over the young Felinian. Instead, he crouched down so they were at eye level. "Tell me something, Korven," Marcus said quietly. "Do you think your family would be proud of how you're acting right now?" The question hit like a photon torpedo to the hull. Korven's defiant expression crumbled for just a moment, revealing the scared, hurt child underneath the anger. "You don't know anything about my family," Korven whispered. But the venom had gone out of his voice. "You're right, I don't," Marcus agreed. "But I'm betting they loved you enough to want you to have a future. And I'm betting that future doesn't include you burning bridges with every adult who tries to help you." The classroom was so quiet that the hum of the environmental systems seemed deafeningly loud. Even Bloop had stopped her bubbling entirely, creating an eerie silence that stretched between the human and the Felinian cub. "The galaxy's unfair, kid," Marcus continued, his voice gentle but firm. "Terrible things happen to good people every single day, but that doesn't give you the right to make everyone else's day terrible too." Korven's lower lip began to tremble. His claws, which had been extended in defensive anger, slowly retracted. "I miss them," he whispered, so quietly that only Marcus could hear him. "I know you do," Marcus replied, "and that's okay. Missing people means they mattered. But Professor Thalak here is trying to teach you about civilizations that fell apart, partly so you can help make sure yours doesn't completely disappear." The young Felinian looked up at Professor Thalak, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of amazement and concern. For the first time since the semester began, Korven's expression wasn't filled with hostility. Korven started, then stopped. He looked around the classroom at his fellow students, all of whom were staring at him with various expressions of sympathy and curiosity. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Marcus remained crouched by the desk, patient as stone, while Professor Thalak's mandibles clicked softly in nervous rhythm. Finally, Korven took a deep breath that made his small chest expand significantly. "Professor Thalak," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I apologize for being disrespectful." The words seemed to physically pain him, but they came out clear and sincere. The effect on the classroom was immediate and profound. Professor Thalak's mandibles stopped clicking entirely. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Young one," Thalak said softly. "Apology accepted. And I am sorry for your losses, but it was the reaction of the other students that truly demonstrated the power of the moment." Pip and Pop, the usually cynical Zephyrian twins, were staring with their mouths slightly open. Skrex had stopped his constant clicking entirely. Even the normally hyperactive Krillin student Zip was sitting perfectly still. But the most telling reaction came from the back of the classroom, where 3 advanced students were observing the lesson as part of their teaching practicum. 2 of them were whispering furiously to each other, but the third, a massive Korlaxian named Threk, was staring at Marcus with an expression of pure amazement. "How did you do that?" Threk rumbled, his deep voice carrying clearly across the room. "I've been studying child psychology for 6 cycles, and I've never seen anything like that." Marcus stood up slowly, brushing off his uniform. "Do what?" "Get him to apologize," Threk said, gesturing toward Korven with one of his 4 arms. "The instructors have been trying all semester. He's been sent to discipline 3 times, had his privileges revoked twice, and even had a session with the school counselor. Nothing worked." The human shrugged, looking genuinely puzzled by the attention. I just talked to him like he was a person instead of a problem. This statement seemed to hit the room like a small explosion. Professor Thalak's mandibles began clicking again, but this time it was the thoughtful clicking of deep consideration rather than irritation. Fascinating, Thalak murmured. In all my cycles of teaching, I never considered that approach. Really? Marcus looked surprised. That's the first thing they teach in human schools. Well, the good ones anyway. Korven, who had been quietly wiping his eyes with the back of his paw, suddenly looked up. Are all humans like you? The question caught Marcus off guard. He laughed, a sound that seemed to lighten the atmosphere in the room considerably. Oh, stars, no, he said, grinning. Most humans are way more messed up than I am. I just happen to have really good parents. This answer seemed to satisfy Korven, who nodded solemnly and opened his data tablet to section 47. Professor Thalak cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. Well then, now that we're all settled, let's continue with our lesson. As I was saying, pre-warp civilizations show several common patterns before collapse. The lesson proceeded normally after that, but there was a different quality to the atmosphere. Students who had previously seemed disengaged were now paying attention. Even Korven, who had spent the entire semester slouched in defiant boredom, was taking notes. About halfway through the class, Korven raised his paw tentatively. Yes, Korven, Professor Thalak said, his voice encouraging. Professor, you mentioned that some civilizations survived near-extinction events. How did they do it? The question was clearly related to his own people's situation, but it was asked with genuine curiosity rather than angry desperation. Thalak's expression brightened considerably. This was exactly the kind of engaged questioning he lived for. Excellent question, young one. There are several factors, but the most important seems to be adaptability. Species that could change their approach to problems tended to survive, while those that remained rigid did not. Korven nodded thoughtfully, making notes on his tablet. The sight of the young Felinian actually participating in class seemed to energize the other students as well. Bloop began bubbling questions about aquatic civilizations. The Krillin student wanted to know about technological approaches to survival. Even the notoriously quiet Mantarian in the corner began showing signs of interest. Marcus watched all of this with a small smile, apparently content to observe. But Professor Thalak wasn't about to let him off that easily. Mr. Webb, Thalak said, as our resident human expert, perhaps you could share some insights into how your species handled near-extinction events. Marcus looked uncomfortable for the first time since entering the classroom. Oh, I don't know if I'm qualified to speak as an expert on anything. Come on, Korven said, surprising everyone, including himself. You got me to apologize. That's practically impossible. You must know something useful. The room erupted in quiet laughter, the kind that comes from relief rather than genuine humor. The fact that Korven was making jokes was perhaps even more shocking than his earlier apology. Well, Marcus said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly, humans did come pretty close to wiping ourselves out a few times. Nuclear war, climate change, resource depletion. The usual suspects. How did you survive? Asked Pip, while Pop nodded eagerly. Honestly, we got lucky, and we had people who refused to give up, even when giving up made perfect sense. Marcus paused, looking thoughtful. There was this scientist, back when we were dealing with climate change. Sarah Chen, I think her name was. She spent her entire life working on atmospheric restoration, even though most people thought it was hopeless. Professor Thalak's mandibles clicked with interest. Did she succeed? Not in her lifetime, Marcus said. She died before seeing the results of her work. But her research became the foundation for the technology that eventually stabilized our climate. She never knew she saved the world. The classroom fell quiet again, but this time it was the quiet of contemplation rather than tension. That's the thing about survival, Marcus continued. It's not about the big dramatic moments. It's about the people who keep working when everything looks hopeless. It's about the small acts of kindness that keep communities together. It's about apologizing when you mess up and trying to do better next time." He looked directly at Korven as he said the last part, and the young Felinian's ears perked up with understanding. "Your people aren't gone, Korven," Marcus said gently. "You're here. Your culture, your memories, your values. As long as you're alive and carrying those things forward, they're alive too." The effect of these words on Korven was immediate and visible. His posture straightened, his fur smoothed down, and for the first time since the semester began, he looked like the confident young being he was meant to be. The lesson bell chimed, indicating the end of the class period. Students began packing up their materials with the usual chatter and movement, but the atmosphere remained notably different from the beginning of class. As the students filed out, several of them approached Marcus to thank him or ask additional questions. The advanced students in the back were deep in animated discussion about what they had witnessed, but it was Professor Thalak's reaction that would be remembered longest by those who witnessed it. The veteran educator approached the human with an expression of profound respect, extending his primary manipulator appendage in the traditional greeting of equals. "Mr. Webb," he said formally. "In 23 cycles of teaching, I have never seen anything quite like what happened here today." Marcus shook the offered appendage, looking embarrassed. "I really didn't do anything special, Professor. Just basic human parenting techniques." "Precisely," Thalak said, his mandibles clicking with what might have been amusement. "Perhaps it is time we learned more about these human parenting techniques." As the classroom emptied, Korven lingered by his desk, carefully packing his tablet and stylus. When he finished, he approached Marcus hesitantly. "Mr. Webb," he said quietly. "Yeah, kid." "Thank you." Marcus smiled and ruffled the fur on top of Korven's head, a gesture that would normally have resulted in claws and hissing, but instead earned him a small smile. "Just remember what we talked about, okay? Your family's story doesn't end with their deaths. It continues with what you do next." Korven nodded solemnly and headed for the door. But just before he left, he turned back. "Mr. Webb, tomorrow, could you tell us more about Sarah Chen?" "Sure thing, kid." As Korven disappeared into the corridor, Professor Thalak and Marcus stood alone in the empty classroom. "Remarkable," Thalak murmured. "Simply remarkable." "What's remarkable?" Marcus asked. "In one class period, you accomplished what an entire team of trained professionals could not manage in half a semester. You turned a hostile, broken child into an engaged student." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise. "He was never broken, Professor. Just hurt. And hurt beings lash out. It's natural." "Perhaps," Thalak said thoughtfully, "but recognizing that truth and knowing how to act on it are very different things." The two educators walked toward the door together, but Thalak paused at the threshold. "Mr. Webb, I would very much like to discuss your teaching methods further. Would you be available for dinner this evening?" "Sure," Marcus said. "But I have to warn you, I'm not really trained as an educator. I'm just a xenobiologist who happens to work well with kids." Professor Thalak's mandibles clicked with what was definitely amusement now. "My dear human," he said, "I am beginning to suspect that working well with younglings is the most important qualification an educator can have." As they left the classroom together, neither of them noticed the small group of advanced students who had lingered in the hallway, furiously taking notes and planning changes to their own teaching approaches. The ripple effects of what had happened in that classroom would spread far beyond a single apology from one troubled cub. But that, as they say, is a story for another day. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Academy buzzed with an energy that Administrative Director Vex had never experienced in her 40 cycles of service. The 8-armed Octellion was reviewing incident reports when her communication device chimed with an urgent message from the Department of Educational Standards. "Director Vex," the holographic image of Chancellor Grimm flickered to life above her desk. The massive Korlaxian's forearms were crossed in what she recognized as barely contained excitement. "We need to discuss the Webb incident immediately." Vex's tentacles curled with confusion. "The Webb incident, Chancellor?" I'm not familiar with any incident involving our exchange instructor. Precisely the point, Grimm rumbled. There have been 0 disciplinary reports from any class where Marcus Webb has been present. 0 behavioral incidents, 0 academic complaints, in 3 weeks. The implications of this statement hit Vex like a malfunctioning fusion drive. She quickly pulled up the behavioral statistics on her main display, her tentacles dancing across multiple interfaces simultaneously. "By the cosmic void," she whispered, staring at the data streams flowing across her screens. "These numbers cannot be accurate." "I had the same reaction," Grimm said. "I ordered 3 separate audits. The results are consistent. Classroom disruptions and web-supervised sessions have decreased by 97%. Student engagement scores have increased by 43%. And most remarkably, voluntary participation has increased by 68%. Vex's tentacles went completely still, a sure sign of shock. "Chancellor, these numbers would be impressive if they represented improvements over an entire academic year. You're telling me this happened in 3 weeks? That's not even the most interesting part," Grimm continued. "Pull up the psychological evaluation reports for student designation Korven 447. Vex's tentacles flew across her interfaces, calling up the requested files. What she saw made 2 of her hearts skip beats. The troubled Felinian refugee, who had been flagged as a potential expulsion candidate just a month ago, now showed psychological markers indicating healthy adjustment, increased social integration, and what the report classified as remarkable emotional resilience. "This is impossible," Vex said flatly. "Trauma recovery doesn't happen this quickly, especially not in institutional settings." And yet, Grimm's image gestured to something off-screen. "I have 17 similar cases from various species, all showing accelerated recovery patterns after interaction with human web." Before Vex could respond, her office door chimed. "Director, Professor Thalak requests immediate audience. He says it's regarding the educational methodology inquiry." "Send him in," Vex called, her tentacles already reorganizing the displays to accommodate another viewer. Professor Thalak entered with an energy that Vex had never seen from the normally reserved educator. His mandibles were clicking in rapid, excited patterns, and all 6 of his eyes were focused intently on her. "Director Vex, Chancellor Grimm," he acknowledged, then launched immediately into his report. "I have completed my preliminary analysis of human educational techniques as demonstrated by Marcus Webb, and the results are unprecedented." "Go on," Grimm encouraged. "Human pedagogy appears to operate on fundamentally different principles from traditional galactic methods," Thalak began, his excitement making his words tumble together. "Where we focus on correction and discipline, humans emphasize what they call emotional validation. Where we establish authority through hierarchy, humans build what they term rapport." Vex's tentacles twisted skeptically. "Professor, these sound like feel-good concepts with no practical application." "That's what I thought initially," Thalak admitted. "But observe the measurable results. In my advanced xenobiology class, where Webb serves as co-instructor, we have achieved 100% assignment completion for the first time in my career. Students are requesting additional materials. They are forming study groups voluntarily." The silence that followed this statement was broken only by the soft hum of the office environmental systems. 100%? Vex repeated weakly. "Yesterday, I witnessed something that challenged everything I thought I knew about education," Thalak continued. "Young Korven approached me after class to discuss extra credit opportunities." "Korven, asking for extra work?" Chancellor Grimm's image leaned forward. "What exactly did Webb do to achieve this transformation?" "That's the remarkable part," Thalak said, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "He didn't do anything extraordinary by human standards. He listened. He acknowledged feelings before addressing behavior. He treated each student as an individual rather than a problem to be solved." "You make it sound simple," Vex observed. "Simple to describe, complex to implement," Thalak corrected. It requires a level of emotional intelligence that most species develop differently than humans. They seem to have evolved these skills as survival mechanisms. Before anyone could respond, Vex's communication system erupted with incoming calls. Her display showed priority messages from department heads across the academy. "Director Vex," came the voice of Dr. Splint from Advanced Physics. "I need to speak with you about your human instructor. My graduate students are requesting to audit his classes, and frankly, I want to know why." Another voice chimed in immediately. "Director, this is Professor Kelm from Social Sciences. Can we discuss expanding the human exchange program? My colleagues at other institutions are asking questions I can't answer." Within minutes, Vex's office was flooded with requests, reports, and inquiries, all centered around one unremarkable-looking human who had somehow revolutionized education at one of the galaxy's most prestigious institutions. "Chancellor," Vex said, using her priority override to cut through the chaos, "I think we need to speak with Webb directly." Meanwhile, 3 levels down in classroom 47B, Marcus Webb was completely unaware of the administrative storm brewing around him. He was focused entirely on helping Zip, the hyperactive Krillin student, understand the finer points of interspecies communication. "The key thing to remember, Zip," Marcus was saying, "is that fast doesn't always mean better. Sometimes slowing down helps others keep up with your brilliant ideas." Zip's natural vibration frequency decreased noticeably, a sign of concentrated effort among his species. "But Marcus, when I slow down, the ideas start to pile up in my head like ships waiting to dock." "I know that feeling," Marcus laughed. "Have you tried writing them down as they come? That way you don't lose them, but you can organize them before sharing." The simple suggestion had an immediate effect. Zip pulled out his data tablet and began rapidly inputting notes, his expression shifting from frustrated confusion to focused concentration. Korven, who had been observing this interaction while working on his own assignment, looked up with interest. "That's actually brilliant," he said. "I used to have the same problem with my anger. All the feelings would pile up until I exploded." "What changed?" asked Bloop, her bubbling creating a gentle background rhythm to the conversation. "Marcus taught me that feelings are like pressure in a containment system," Korven explained. "You have to release them gradually, or the whole system fails catastrophically." The casual way Korven discussed his emotional growth would have shocked any observer familiar with his behavior just weeks earlier. But in this classroom, such transformations had become almost routine. "Speaking of pressure systems," Marcus said, smoothly transitioning back to the lesson, "who can tell me why the atmospheric processors on Kepler 442b required manual calibration every 72 hours? Hands, paws, tentacles, and various other appendages shot up around the room. The eager participation would have been remarkable in any classroom, but in a mixed-species advanced placement course, it was unprecedented. As the discussion continued, none of the students noticed the small group of observers who had quietly entered the back of the classroom. Director Vex, Chancellor Grimm, and Professor Thalak watched in fascination as Webb facilitated a complex technical discussion while simultaneously managing the diverse emotional and social needs of 23 different species. "Remarkable," Grimm whispered to Vex. "He's not just teaching atmospheric science. He's conducting a masterclass in interspecies diplomacy." They watched as Webb mediated a minor disagreement between the Voltani student Skrex and one of the Aquarian twins, turning the conflict into a learning opportunity about cultural differences in problem-solving approaches. "Notice how he doesn't take sides," Thalak murmured. "He validates both perspectives while guiding them toward synthesis." The lesson concluded with Webb assigning what he called curiosity homework, asking each student to find one thing about the atmospheric topic that genuinely interested them, and to prepare one question for the next class. As students began packing up their materials, the transformation in classroom dynamics was obvious to the observers. Students from different species were collaborating naturally, sharing resources and discussing concepts with enthusiasm rather than obligation. Korven approached Webb's desk, no longer the hostile, defensive creature from weeks earlier. "Marcus," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said about Sarah Chen, about people who keep working when everything seems hopeless." "Yeah? What about it?" "I want to do that," Korven said simply. "I want to study atmospheric restoration for my planet." The room fell completely silent. Even the normally chatty students stopped their conversations to listen. "Korven," Marcus said gently, "atmospheric restoration is incredibly complex work. It takes decades of study, and even then, success isn't guaranteed." "I know," Korven replied, his young voice steady with determination. "But you said survival isn't about the big dramatic moments. It's about the people who keep working when everything looks hopeless." The pride in Marcus's expression was unmistakable. "Then we better get you started on some advanced chemistry prerequisites." As students filed out of the classroom, the three administrators remained in the back, processing what they had witnessed. "Director," Chancellor Grimm said finally, "I believe we need to reconsider our entire pedagogical approach." "Agreed," Vex replied, her tentacles curling with decision. "Professor Thalak, I'm authorizing a comprehensive study of human educational methodology. I want a full analysis within 6 weeks." "With respect, Director," Thalak said, "I believe we should start by simply asking Webb to explain his methods." Humans seem to appreciate direct communication. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus approached the group. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help noticing you've been observing my classes. Is there some kind of problem?" The three administrators exchanged glances. Finally, Chancellor Grimm stepped forward. "Mr. Webb, we've been reviewing the statistical impact of your teaching methods. The results are unprecedented." Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Statistical impact? I'm just trying to help kids learn." "That's exactly what we'd like to discuss," Vex said. "Would you be available for a formal consultation with our education committee?" "Sure, I guess. But I should probably mention that I'm not formally trained as an educator. Back home, I mostly just helped out at my local community center." This revelation seemed to stun all three administrators simultaneously. "Community center?" Thalak repeated weakly. "Yeah, after-school programs, summer camps, that kind of thing. Basic volunteer work." The implications of this statement hung in the air like a neutron star's gravitational field. The revolutionary changes they had witnessed weren't the result of advanced training or specialized degrees. They were simply the natural application of human social instincts. "Mr. Webb," Grimm said slowly, "would you be willing to conduct training sessions for our faculty?" "Training sessions on what?" "On being human," Vex said, her tentacles curling with what might have been humor. "Or at least, on teaching the way humans do." The faculty development sessions that followed would become legendary in galactic educational circles. Marcus, clearly uncomfortable with being treated as an expert, approached the training with the same casual directness he brought to everything else. "The thing is," he told a room full of distinguished professors, "humans aren't actually that special. We just evolved in social groups where cooperation was necessary for survival. Most of what you call advanced techniques are just basic social skills for us." Dr. Yilix, a prominent Zentorian educational theorist, raised one of her crystalline appendages. "But, Mr. Webb, the emotional regulation methods you demonstrate require sophisticated psychological understanding." Marcus shrugged. "Not really. If someone's upset, you acknowledge they're upset before you try to fix the problem. If someone's being disruptive, you figure out what they need instead of just punishing them. It's pretty basic stuff." The room full of advanced degrees and professional credentials absorbed this basic stuff with the intensity of students discovering fire. Professor Kent from Applied Mathematics asked, "But how do you maintain classroom authority while showing such flexibility?" "Authority isn't about making people afraid of you," Marcus replied. "It's about making them trust that you know what you're doing and that you care about their success." These simple statements would reshape pedagogical theory across 17 star systems. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Korven himself addressed the faculty assembly. The young Felinian, now serving as student representative, spoke with the poise and confidence that had seemed impossible just months earlier. "Professors," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the auditorium. "Before Marcus arrived, I was angry at everyone because I thought no one understood my pain. But Marcus didn't try to fix my pain or make it go away. He just helped me understand that my pain could be fuel for something better." The applause that followed was unlike anything the Academy had ever heard. It wasn't the polite recognition typical of academic gatherings. It was the sound of genuine appreciation for a truth well spoken. In the weeks that followed, the Webb method, as it came to be known, spread throughout the Galactic Educational Network. Universities requested human exchange instructors. Research grants funded studies on human emotional intelligence. Educational conferences featured panels on applied human pedagogy. But Marcus himself remained largely unchanged by all the attention. He continued teaching his classes with the same relaxed competence, helping students navigate not just academic challenges, but the complex business of growing up in a diverse galaxy. One evening, as he finished grading assignments in his small faculty quarters, his communication device chimed with an incoming call. The holographic image that appeared was of a distinguished Aquarian, wearing the formal robes of the Galactic Education Council. "Mr. Webb," the figure said formally, "I am Chancellor Tide of the Galactic Education Council. We would like to offer you the position of Director of Pedagogical Development for the entire Galactic Educational System." Marcus looked up from his grading, stylus still in hand. "That sounds like a very important job." "Indeed. The most important educational position in the galaxy. And it would involve a lot of meetings, administrative work, policy development, that sort of thing." Naturally, Marcus smiled politely. "Thank you for the offer, Chancellor, but I think I'll stick with teaching. The kids here still need help with their atmospheric science homework." The Chancellor's expression suggested this wasn't the response he had expected. "Mr. Webb, this position would allow you to influence the education of billions of young beings across thousands of worlds." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But right now, I've got 23 kids in my classes who need me to show up tomorrow and help them learn. That seems more important to me." After the call ended, Marcus returned to his grading. Outside his window, the Academy's diverse student body moved through the courtyards, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of interspecies interaction. Somewhere in that mixture, a young Felinian named Korven was probably studying atmospheric chemistry, preparing for the long journey toward restoring his homeworld. Other students were discovering their own paths, supported by faculty who had learned that teaching was as much about caring as it was about knowledge. The Webb method would continue to spread across the galaxy, transforming educational systems and improving countless lives. Research papers would be written, theories would be developed, and Marcus Webb's name would become synonymous with revolutionary pedagogy. But the man himself would remain in classroom 47B, helping young beings understand that learning was just another word for growing, and that growth happened best when someone cared enough to make sure you didn't have to do it alone. After all, as he liked to remind his students, the most important things in life weren't about being special. They were about being present, being patient, and being willing to help others become the best versions of themselves. And sometimes that simple human truth was exactly what the galaxy needed.